Bet the board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Furman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board college football preview series, the American Athletic officially in the can. And if you haven't already listened to that fine podcast where we broke down the league from top to bottom, encourage you to do so. A lot of great information there. But we shift our focus from the AAC to the juggernaut that is a newly revamped Conference USA. I'm your host, Todd Furman, joined as always by college football handicapper extraordinaire Brad Powers. And Brad, for us getting out of the starting gates, a little bit of rough around the edges with a preseason preview, I thought we did damn well without Payne here to drag us down last week.
I thought so too, and you know, obviously we'll have our digs at Payne throughout the course of the show today, but he even said, that was a pretty good show, so even though we threw some digs at him, he even seemed to enjoy himself re-listening.
You know, when the guy's joyriding around the country, I guess he needs plenty of podcasts to try and fill his time in the airwaves, sitting on tarmacs or hanging out in airport bars. So we'll let him regale us with some of those stories when we get into some of the Power 5 conferences. But we talked about the American Athletic, and there was a little bit of, you know, excitement in terms of the top of that league. Brad, I don't want to play spoiler here, but when I look at Conference USA, did some deep diving here for some of the new teams that were in there, even the so-called favorites. This may be a league that gets to be a little bit challenging, but because of some unique scheduling quirks, we are going to get all too comfortable with betting this league on a nightly basis. More about that in a minute. But when we look at Conference USA, we focused a little bit on realignment last week for the AAC. Conference USA going to look very different this season than what it did in the past. You have a pair of FCS members stepping up in Jacksonville State and Sam Houston State, two programs that have experienced a ton of success, you know, when it comes to winning at the FCS level. New FBS members coming into the league, New Mexico State and Liberty. They kind of kick to the curb the independent tags that they've had, and the members that are left behind, Florida International, Louisiana Tech, Middle Tennessee State, UTEP, and Western Kentucky. So for me, I guess the dumbest question that I have right off the top is about two new teams coming in, jumping up in class from FCS to FBS. We had a team last year in James Madison that we saw the betting market really struggle to price them early in the year. There's no better man for college football history than to kind of give us a little bit of context on all this. But what should we expect realistically for two teams making that jump, even if it is probably one of the weaker leagues on paper that we're going to see at the FBS level?
So it's a really good question, and obviously I need sample size. I need data points. So what I did when you reached out and, you know, says, hey, you said you were going to ask me this question. I hadn't even really thought of it too much to deep dive into it. So what I did was I just went back through the last decade, looked at the last dozen schools that have made that transition, that jump from the FCS to the FBS, and pretty mixed bag. You know, if we're doing like average wins in that first season of FBS play, you're looking at right around 4.7. And it's funny because if you look at the win totals here for these two teams, you got one team at 3.5, 4, and then you got another team at 5, 5.5. So you do an average of these two teams, and it's right around 4.7. What I did take away, and I not only looked at straight up records, I looked, you know, do they get priced accordingly as far as the game in and game out basis? Slightly negative against the spread, 48%, but nothing to write home about as far as really taking advantage of something. What I did take away was this. The teams that did the best, in my opinion, the Appalachian States, the Georgia Southerns, and you mentioned it, James Madison. Well, those schools coming in from FCS, I would argue, were the three best schools as far as FCS programs traditionally, historically, and what they were coming into the FBS. And they hit the ground running, had a winning season, no problem, their first year. And I'll tell anybody, at the top level of the FCS, there's really not much difference between, the Missouri Valley conferences, the SoCon back in the day, the CAA, the Colonial. At the top of those leagues, there's really not much difference in standard of play, in my opinion. My power rankings, I mean, the top 15, 20 schools at the FCS level compare very favorably to the bottom, 20, 30 teams as far as the FBS. So that was my biggest takeaway. If you're really good at the FCS level, you'll do just fine. Now, with these two teams, Sam Houston State won a recent national title. And obviously, Jacksonville State's been in the top 10, 7 of the last 10 years. They've both been really good. My worry is this, though. They didn't play in necessarily the toughest conferences at the FCS level, the Ohio Valley and the Southland for much of the last decade for Sam Houston State. I know they had that 1 year in what they called the quote-unquote WAC, but those weren't the toughest conferences that these two teams are coming from. So I think it's not going to be as easy as what James Madison made it out to be last year.
Yeah, I mean, when we look at James Madison, and not going to go off on a huge tangent, we'll, of course, cover the Dukes in more detail when we go into the Sun Belt. I mean, it was fascinating to watch how they were priced week in, week out early in the season because the market couldn't decide on how their numbers should open against Middle Tennessee State. They go out there and they win that game going away, and you're left trying to figure out, okay, is this about James Madison or is this about MTSU? Then, I mean, we joked about it, and we'll get to Middle Tennessee State as well. They go out there and absolutely blast Colorado State after they get steamed against. So it puts you into a little bit of a pretzel trying to figure out these teams. And it's why we tell people all the time, you're going to listen to these Bet the Board podcasts, you're going to watch week one, and you have to be willing to adjust on the fly because so much can change once you get that first data point or that second data point, especially with teams that are stepping up in class as you try and identify their depth and everything else. Sam Houston State, a very interesting case, and Casey Keeler gave an interview that I think Brad was conducted on Skype with guys that were living in their parents' basement, but shared a lot of information that we'll get to when we talk about the Bearcats and some of their expectations. Now, as far as Conference USA as well, in addition to some of the changing faces in the league, they're going to go through something that the MAC is all too accustomed to in terms of playing on weeknights. But it's not just one or two games here or there. From essentially week 5 to week 9, the entire league is going to play midweek games on Tuesdays or Wednesdays. When you look at that from a handicapping standpoint, do you feel there's an intangible edge that can be gained? Do you feel the quality of play is a little bit different? How do you go about approaching these games differently than you would if some of these mid-major leagues were playing nestled on a Saturday where maybe they could slip through the cracks for a lot of odds makers?
Yeah, so I'll first talk from like a program aspect and a conference aspect. Certainly that they want to get more exposure, basically being they got the Conference USA label, but this looks like an entirely different conference as far as the teams go. So I get it, wanting to get added exposure. They get lost in the mix on a normal college Saturday with 55, 60 games on a card. I would say that, hey, that sounds good. You're getting extra TV money, extra eyes to the set, but coming from a MAC school, graduating from a MAC school, when I was at the MAC school 20 years ago, I would argue the MAC was maybe the best group of 5 type of a small conference out there. Now, 20 years later, it's the worst, or at least before Conference USA got established here. So all that added exposure for the MAC over the last 20 years hasn't done wonders for that league. Coming from the days of Ben Roethlisberger at quarterback and Toledo beating Penn State and all this other stuff hasn't been good. So I'm not sure in that regard that they're going to get the added benefits like they perceive to be. As far as this year, opportunity, you mentioned it. Can we take advantage? So I went through these schedules, and because they're unique, and sometimes they're playing on Thursday, sometimes they're playing on Tuesday, they're short weeks for a lot of teams. I identified 3 teams in the conference that are going to be impacted most, and it's all that late September through October. These 3 schools, Jacksonville State, Louisiana Tech, Middle Tennessee, all 3 of these schools in a course of 24 days have to play 5 games, 3 of them on less than a week prep. So they're playing like 5 days prep, 6 days prep. So I think it's a negative, specifically with 2 of the 3. Jacksonville State, just because they're new, they don't have the depth like some of the other FBS schools have. So I'm really worried about them out of the gate, that they got to play 5 games in 24 days, late September and October. Middle Tennessee, I'm also worried about, just because they start the season with Alabama and Missouri, and then they start getting into this 5-game stretch. So I'm worried about them. And then Louisiana Tech's another team. But we'll talk about more of them later. It's a negative, and I think it's weighing down their win total a little bit, maybe. But I'm not as worried with Louisiana Tech with all their Power 5 transfers as I am the other two schools.
Yeah, it looks like there was a nice influx to Ruxton. Hank Bachmeier, obviously the biggest name to give them some stability at quarterback, but we'll do a little bit of a deep dive on Louisiana Tech shortly. A reminder to all of you, our loyal Bet the Board listeners that are out there, encourage you to follow Brad on Twitter at BradPower7. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there as well. Follow Payne if you're so inclined at Payne Insider. Most importantly, the Bet the Board podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And if you haven't already done so, check out Cardboard Chat, a great look at the sports card and memorabilia industry. Payne does an outstanding job with Jesse Craig of PWCC. And if you're looking for a little bit of action week in, week out at the track, we do the Stay Green podcast, which is all about NASCAR, and one of the crown jewel races will come this weekend in the form of the Coke 600. Into the individual teams, Brad, and we may as well start. We're going win total order, whether we agree or not with where some of these betting markets are set. We'll let the odds makers do the heavy lifting for us to kind of kick things off. And we can start with one of the new members, the Liberty Flames in Lynchburg, Virginia. Their win total sits at 9, shaded to the over -125. And of course, some of these win totals will vary. As we always say around these parts, shop around, get yourself the best of the number until the market ends up reaching an equilibrium point. In steps Jamie Chadwell, a name that college football fans are all too familiar with, given everything he accomplished while at Coastal Carolina. The Flames won 34 games over the last 4 seasons with Hugh Freeze manning the ship, and the school has proven willing to spend at a very high level for a Group of 5 team. When you look at the coaching hire first and foremost, Brad, were you surprised that Chadwell didn't get more consideration for a Power 5 job, or do you feel this is a nice step up for a program that does want to commit money athletically and where he can win right away in Conference USA?
So diving deep into that, I mean, I think on the surface you'd be like, he's had so much success. Typically when you have success like that at the G5 level, I mean, sooner or later you're going to get a P5 job. But diving in a little deeper, into the history, there was some NCAA sanctions at one of his stops at Charleston Southern. And also keep in mind, he does run a somewhat quirky offense. I like it, but it has option principles. And, man, athletic directors do not like anything to do with option football. So when you look at those two things, and then also how he fills out his assistant coaching staff, he's system guys. He doesn't necessarily take flashy names or guys that are up and coming as far as recruiting. He's system over anything. So when you take that under consideration, maybe you shouldn't be as surprised that he hasn't gotten a Power 5 job yet. But I'm here to tell you, at the Group of 5 level, Liberty's about as good as it gets. Just from a spending aspect, I mean, look no further than Chadwell's contract, 7 years, $4 million per year. I mean, that's at the very top of the Group of 5. In fact, I mean, that compares favorably to the bottom 10, 15 coaches as far as a pay scale at the Power 5 level. So this is
would Notre Dame spend anything close to that on a coordinator if it meant getting you guys over the hump, Brad?
They would not. I think, and they proved that this offseason that they are not willing to do that. They'll pay the money for the athletic director and some of the guys sitting on the board of trustees, but when it comes to paying other things, they're happy. Standing pat, I guess, whatever. We'll go down that road another time. But, yeah, I mean, Liberty spends money, and not just football, but, I mean, this is really on the 30,000 feet, but this is if you're not familiar with Liberty, they are spending $150, $200 million over their athletic budget, and this is a school that's really serious and taking all their athletic programs serious as far as this level.
Yeah, and you mentioned Chadwell, not just the salary, but what he was able to obviously accomplish at Coastal Carolina. Clearly, most of that success in Myrtle Beach was attributed to a starting quarterback that gave them stability in Grayson McCall. That may not be a luxury, Brad, that they have at Liberty, especially coming out of spring practice. I mean, it looked like there were a trio of guys competing for the job. I know this is a program that you bet regularly last year. Jonathan Bennett, Caden Slater, and then a USM transfer in Trey Lowe, who started the last 4 games for the Golden Eagles in 2022. But what was interesting for me is I watched a presser, or I should say an interview with Chadwell, and they asked him about the transfer portal and the things he was looking for. He mentioned quarterback being somewhere that they were going to spend a little bit of focus. So when we go in to try and assess Liberty right now, in terms of the quarterbacks they have on the roster, it doesn't sound like he and Willie Korn necessarily believe their day one starter is already on campus.
That's crazy to me because, They won some games with Bennett. He's not going to overwhelm you, but I think they can win with a kid like Bennett. Trey Lowe won some games and, has some experience from Southern Miss. I think from a talent aspect, Salter's probably the most talented. I really didn't put it all together, but he had some inexperience last year. But when he was on, he was on. I thought he would be the choice just from a talent perspective, but that's kind of surprising to me because I think any one of those three guys, I'm not saying that they're going to win, 11 games, but I think they can win 8 or 9 with any of those three guys at quarterback.
When you look at the rest of the roster in terms of offensive difference makers, and even if we want to transition to the defensive side a little bit, do you feel Liberty checks enough boxes to be a legitimate threat to win the league and flirt with a very ambitious win total when you look at a 9, knowing it's going to take them 10 wins or more, but we can obviously assume that they're not going to peter off late in the year this season like they did last year once those rumors started to swirl about Hugh Freeze's departure?
So everything's relative. If I'm comparing them to the last couple of years on Liberty, I don't like what I'm seeing as far as personnel. Certainly from an experience aspect. I mean, you mentioned, some of the offensive skill. Day Hunter, really good running back, transferred after spring. I'm not sure that the preseason magazines will have that, in their information. So make sure you got that checked down. I do like a wide receiver, C.J. Daniels. He was out most of last year. He was one of their better wide receivers 2 years ago. So I like him, but I'm really concerned on the defensive side. The 3 guys that really stood out to me were all up front on the defensive line. I mean, they had 3 guys combined for 20 sacks and 47.5 tackles for loss, led by Darrell Johnson. All those guys are gone. So I'm worried with some of the inexperience that they have, but like I mentioned, everything's relative. Do I still think the replacements are going to be better than the UTEPs and the New Mexico States and the Sam Houston States of the world? Yes. So I do understand that the win total being that high, especially when you look at the schedule, Todd. They go from playing Arkansas, BYU, Wake Forest, Virginia Tech last year, 4 Power 5 teams to – and I do early strength of schedule ratings. They have the weakest schedule out of 133 teams in the entire country. So I'm not as concerned with all that. So I think they are a legitimate contender in year 1 under Chadwell.
You mean replacing some of those opponents that you mentioned with a season opener against your alma mater in Bowling Green, traveling to Western New York week 3 to take on Buffalo, and that late week 12 matchup against the college football powerhouse from Amherst, Massachusetts, in UMass isn't going to be something that's going to catch your eye, Brad?
No, it does not move the needle.
All right, I just had to check. I figured, if you were looking for a game that you had circled on your calendar with national championship implications late in the year, it was definitely going to be the Liberty Flames against the UMass Minutemen. On to a perennial power in Conference USA, that being the Hilltoppers of Western Kentucky, led by Tyson Helton. And when we look at their win total, 8.5 shaded under, although one very prominent shop has seen a little bit of under money come in, moving that off right around minus $1.25 down to minus 150. I did think it was interesting that their social media feed was having a little bit of fun when I was digging into this team, Brad. They basically allowed you to build your favorite Western Kentucky roster. And while I consider myself a college football diehard, I didn't know some of the names there, so I wouldn't have been bidding on one of those $1 or $2 players. But when you look at Western Kentucky, continuity reigns supreme here, especially at the quarterback position. There were plenty of flirtations from Austin Reed, who was the best quarterback in the league, who returned after passing up large sums of money, at least reported NIL deals. Led the country in passing yards a year ago with 4,700 of them, 40 touchdowns, multiple touchdown passes in 12 games, and picked up where he left off as a national champion at West Florida. When you look at Western Kentucky, clearly it's about offense first, but last year they had some struggles when they got into the red zone and their ability to score touchdowns rather than settling for field goals. When you look at the Hilltoppers, reason to believe that this offense will be as dynamic, if not better, with a returning man under center this season.
I don't think it's going to be as good, but I still think it's the best offense in Conference USA and one of the better offenses at the Group of 5 level. They might have been the best offense at the Group of 5 level, at least when they were on. If you don't believe me, popping the tape of the bowl game against South Alabama. I bet South Alabama in that game.
That makes 2 of us, by the way.
Yeah,
and I wrote that ticket off after about 2 drives.
Yeah, I mean, Austin Reed he's not going to play. He's in the portal. Then he's going to play. Other guys opted out. So my thought process was, is this team dialed into this game? Do they really care? Well, like you mentioned, my answer, I knew the answer after 2 drives. I was dead. I mean, the passing offense was as good as I saw from any team in college football last year, watching them knife through South Alabama. Corley's back at wide receiver, a guy only caught 101 passes a year ago. They're not as deep, but I think they filled out with the transfer portal quite well at receiver. I do worry a little bit the offensive line. I don't think it's going to be as good because a couple of their starting offensive linemen probably will start at Auburn and Texas Tech this year, and they like those two kids. I also worry that, kudos to Helton. He's done an unbelievable job hiring these offensive coordinators. One guy, Zach Kitley, is at Texas Tech, and then Arbuckle's at Washington State right now, and they love him. Can you consistently hit home runs hiring offensive coordinators year after year after year? Probably not. This will be their fourth different OC in 4 years, so that worries me a little bit. So it'll be good. I'm not sure it's going to be great offensively.
When we look at Western Kentucky, we'll get to the defensive side of the ball in a second. Schedule is interesting when you look at 2 home games to kick things off, and I think their opener, honestly, for a football nerd like us, is going to be fascinating to watch. When they play host to USF, a new-look Bulls team led by Alex Golish, they'll follow that up with a cupcake and then 2 games that aren't going to define their season, but if you're going to Ohio State, I don't think anybody expects the Hilltoppers to come away with a win. Although we know how short the number was last year when they went to Jordan-Hare to take on Auburn, and then a non-conference revenge game against Troy, one that we actually gave out Troy last year as a best bet on this show. Defensively for Western Kentucky, Tyson Summers appears to have a full rebuild on his hands, and this unit wasn't very good last year in terms of providing much resistance.
No, they weren't. They were the issue. So, I mean, you mentioned a few things there. Metrically, I mean, they were really strong last year as far as an overall team. You mentioned the Auburn game. I mean, the market loved this Western Kentucky team. They were only a 5-point underdog on the road in Auburn in November. So what let them down? Why did they lose 5 games? It was the defense, 36 points per game in those 5 losses for them. Lost a lot. I'm kind of in between there. I mean, if you weren't that good, how much worse can you get? I think their best player by far, he actually stood out to me. I watched their Week 0 game against Austin Peay. That Evans kid on the edge, I thought he was their best player from the get-go on that side of the ball. At least he returns. Tyson Summers is back as DC, but all the rest of his staff is gone and most of their top players. They did a decent job, in my opinion, in the transfer portal. They just, again, the formula is going to be this, Todd. They just got to make a few stops and not getting in their way, and particularly get a few more stops in the red zone. You mentioned it, not only inefficiencies on offense, but they got to, at least allow the opposition to settle for a few more field goals this year when they get down there.
Yeah, such an interesting team. Obviously, one that's fun to watch on a week-in, week-out basis. But with that quick passing game, if they're not able to get protection for Austin Reed, and you highlighted some of the concerns on the offensive line, that may not exactly bode well for their ability to turn short passes into big gains for the run after the catch. That has made that a staple of what they want to accomplish on the offensive side. From Bowling Green, Kentucky to Murfreesboro, Tennessee. In the Middle Tennessee State Blue Raiders, their win total sits at 6.5, slightly shaded to the over, and Rick Stockstill is a name synonymous with all things Blue Raiders football. Signed an extension to keep him there through the 2028 season. It almost feels like a lifetime deal at this point until he decides he wants to hand the baton to his son, Brent Stockstill, to take over. All 5 captains from last year's team have moved on, and last year it was a season, like we talked about at the top, of up and down performances. Sandblasted in the opener by James Madison. They followed up with a dismantling of Colorado State and Fort Collins, a road win at Miami as nearly 4 touchdown underdogs, and a mixed bag in league play. But the true Mona Lisa for me, Brad, for all things MTSU in 2022 was their bowl performance, where they slipped by San Diego State despite negative 66 yards rushing, getting outgained nearly 2-1, but finishing +4 in the turnover battle. Absolutely amazing, but that's Group of 5 football in a nutshell. You talked a little bit about Middle Tennessee State and the scheduling quirks they have, highlighted by back-to-back road games at SEC opponents to kick things off, and then, of course, the meat and potatoes of their calendar where they'll play 5 games in 24 days. What are some of the things that you're looking for to suggest that Middle Tennessee State will have a good season, or will be looking at a team fighting tooth and nail just to get bowl eligible?
Well, it's a little bit of a mixed bag. So you mentioned the up-and-down season a year ago. They did benefit from a bunch of turnovers last year. They're plus 12 in turnovers. Usually that I look for that to lead to some regression. They were negative half yards per play. That doesn't scream 8-5 record when on a per play basis you're getting outgained by a half a yard on every play. Outgained on the season. So typically they would be a poster child. I want to fade this team. They're going to regress. But even with all the scheduling dynamics that I think are a negative, man, they're still better. I mean, this is one program that'll probably benefit one of the most from a little bit of a watered-down Conference USA. They've been pretty average on their stock still, 17 years, 109 and 103. But now, you know, those games that are toss-ups, now probably, I mean, they're going to be favored in 8 of their games because they're just a little bit better than the New Mexico States and the UTEPs of the world. So I thought the win total was about right. But there are some legitimate concerns, particularly on offense. I mean, Chase Cunningham was a guy that could give him a little bit of mobility from that position, very experienced. Almost their wide receiver core was my favorite unit on offense last year, and all of them are gone. A couple of them transferred to Power 5 programs. So I am concerned on the offensive side, Todd.
Yeah, I mean, if we're concerned, you mentioned Chase Cunningham. We're not exactly operating under black and white in terms of who their starting quarterback will be, but at least all signs point to coming out of spring, a guy that has more experience in the system, and Nicholas Vatiatatu, and I'm sure I'm butchering his name, so if his friends or family are listening, don't feel bad calling me out on social media for that. But there were a number of other quarterbacks that took some reps, redshirt freshman Kyle Lowe, DJ Riles, a Presbyterian transfer, and Ren Hafley. And the one thing last spring that, you know, Mitch Stewart said was that everything was operating in slow motion. They were trying to institute a new system. But when you see a veteran that hasn't exactly logged a ton of reps, has been that lifetime backup, yes, he may grab the bull by the horns and go out there and perform, but there's also a reason that you haven't been able to assert your dominance and get named number one in that quarterback room over the last couple seasons previously.
Yeah, so anytime when it comes to inexperience, a lot of times I don't like the guy that, has been there. I mean, I think it's more of an old school philosophy, he's had his time in the program. He's waited his course. I don't like that now, especially when you go out and get somebody in the transfer portal or there's always this, thought process that, you bring in a hotshot recruit. So I'm a little worried about that position. I think it is a significant downgrade no matter who starts there. I'm a little in between in that regard. But with that being said, they turn around and hand it off to the running back. Peasant's pretty good. They really like the offensive line. If there was one position group in the spring that they liked offensively, the offensive line. So that's what I'm doing early on, is leaning on that.
Reason to be optimistic about what they can do as a stop unit. It feels like this is one of the teams in Conference USA that actually wants to hang its hat on playing defense more so than some of the Western Kentuckys and Liberties of the world.
Yes, so I would argue that they probably have the best defense in this conference. A majority of the guys are back, 16 of their top 21 tacklers. I like the Zaylen Wood kid at defensive end. He was able to get a lot of pass rush, but I wonder if it's because teams are double teaming the guy on the other side, Jordan Ferguson. He unfortunately is gone for them. Also a key guy in the secondary, Patterson, who had 7 interceptions a year ago. He departs, and then after the spring, one of the expected starting cornerbacks, Stanley, he transferred out. So, yes, it looks good on paper with a majority of their guys back, but a couple of key impact guys out. So, my expectation is they're going to be good, but probably not as good as last year. And I'm not sure that you can count on this defense to force as many game-changing turnovers as they did a year ago.
One thing we've learned over the years, everything that goes up must come down when it pertains to turnover ratio. And if you've been extremely lucky on one side of the ball, typically regression is right around the corner unless you're a truly elite defense. And last I checked, Middle Tennessee State isn't recruiting 5-star blue chippers that are able to go out there and be ball hawkers on a game-in, game-out basis. No disrespect meant to Blue Raider Nation out there. From Murfreesboro, though, Brad will go to another college football hotbed in Las Cruces, New Mexico, where we're looking at the New Mexico State Aggies, led by head coach and college football lifer Jerry Kill. Their win total sits at 5.5. It is indeed shaded over as well. Kill signed a 6-year extension to stay in Las Cruces, and with 164 career victories, ranks as the 8th winningest active FBS head coach, sits above the likes of Dabo Swinney, Mike Gundy, Jim Harbaugh, Jimbo Fisher, and a slew of other prominent names. it was truly a tale of two seasons for the Aggies. They started 1-5, had losses against Nevada, Minnesota, UTEP, Wisconsin, FIU, and finished like a house on fire down the stretch, going 5-1, highlighted by the late addition to the schedule against an FCS powerhouse in Valparaiso to make New Mexico State bowl eligible and send them on their way to the Motor City before they beat your alma mater for their final win of the campaign. When we look at the 2023 recruiting ranks, obviously not going to blow anybody away in that regard, but sneaky good quarterback play last year, especially over the back half of the schedule with Diego Pavia, gave them some stability, something that we haven't talked about in New Mexico State football all that often the last handful of years.
So let's talk about that back half. Obviously, I mean, it was a big deal. And I know a lot of teams make bowl games now with 40 plus of them on a year in and year out basis. But one team and program that doesn't make many bowl games, New Mexico State, that was only their second bowl since 1960. So for them to get that extra FCS team on the schedule, that they get that waiver from the NCAA, they hammer a bad FCS team, they get to the bowl game, they take advantage and beat Bowling Green in that one. That was a big deal. And I'll tell you, the Liberty game was something. They beat Liberty by 35 as a 24-point underdog. I immediately thought, man, a 59-point cover. You don't get that too often. It was the largest cover in college football in 4 years. And, Stack ranked its top 10 performance on a individual game basis since 1990. So, yeah, they really exceeded expectations, to say the least, down the stretch. You mentioned Pavia. A lot of it had to do with him. In fact, since October 1st, if you're looking at total QBR, he ranked number one. Not in Conference USA, not of the independents that they were playing amongst last year. In the entire country, number one in total QBR. I know he single-handedly crushed me in the bowl game when he scrambled for like 3 first downs on 3rd and long down the stretch to run out the clock to beat my Falcons. But
look, Brad, the one thing for those folks that haven't watched him, he's not Michael Vick in terms of speed in the pocket, or Anthony Richardson for that matter. You look at him and you go, this dude's going to beat me with foot speed here? I can't believe what I'm watching.
He runs flat-footed. He's only like 5'10", 5'11", standing on a phone book. So, he probably, people underestimate him, to say the least. He's not going to run around me, but he ends up doing so. So, I like the quarterback, but with that being said, they went out and got a kid from Texas A&M and Eli Stowers. So, I wouldn't be a bit surprised he ends up being the starting quarterback, even with how well Pavia played down the stretch.
Well, the nice thing about Stowers, if you look at his social media pages, his phone number's right there. So if you want to end up donating to his NIL, you have excellent opportunities to be front and center, Brad, at an awards dinner, should he be able to take home some hardware at the end of the year. Obviously, when we look at New Mexico State's schedule, gets a little bit more difficult, although they have a relatively soft landing spot the first 2 weeks against UMass and Western Illinois. And I say that relatively speaking. Against the Minutemen, they'll follow it up with 3 straight road games, including a trip to Hawaii before they get their bye week. Defensively, for New Mexico State, reason to be optimistic about what Jerry Kill and company are building down there, or is this kind of a wait-and-see approach on the stop unit?
I'm probably more of a wait-and-see for this year, but I really liked what they did last year. When you look at the total defense a year ago, they were number 30, so they were one of the most improved defenses in the entire country. I just worry when any time a program like this loses their top 4 tacklers, there's going to be a question mark there because, like you have mentioned, there's not a 4-star waiting in the wings at a program like this. So it will be wait and see, at least early on the season, to see if they can be at least close to what they were a year ago.
In terms of where you would rank New Mexico State Stadium, since you've been there in person during your illustrious tour, Brad, is it a bottom 10 stadium? Do we put it higher on the totem pole than a lot of the MAC schools? This is the kind of grassroots firsthand experience our listeners lean on when they're ranking that home field advantage.
No, I liked it, honestly. And maybe I'm a little weird, but I stood out, looked out over the horizon, looked at the mountains and whatnot there in Las Cruces. I thought to myself, if I was a head coach here, I could recruit here. I know they say it's one of the toughest jobs in the country, Las Cruces and El Paso, but I'm thinking to myself, I'm a young kid. I could hit the recruiting trail here and sell. And I know he's older, but he turned the program around. Jerry Kill turned the program around overnight. So, and I visited right before last season. So, I at least saw it. I saw Jerry Kill's vision on why he took the job, and he proved himself right.
You know what? You might have been the magic man that they needed there. Once Brad Power sets foot on campus, suddenly New Mexico State's able to go bowling with a second-half surge. And let me tell you, being in Las Cruces to be a head football coach in the college ranks, probably still a better spot than spending quality time in DeKalb, Illinois, a stone's throw from where I grew up.
Yeah, a little bit
Chicago
better than
suburbs,
some of the MAC schools. I didn't want to disparage anybody. I will say, everyone wants to be negative. I've been to like 50 stadiums the last couple of years, and I got 25 more on the docket this year. There was one that I didn't like at all. It was Kansas.
I mean, look, you go into the fog, everything is anticlimactic when you walk outside and go, wait, they actually play football here outside of college basketball. So we'll get to some of the more, you to peel back the curtain on some of those Brad Power stadium rankings that were there. But I will say, having been to Las Cruces myself, not necessarily a football stadium, beautiful area of the country. And for those folks who've never been to the White Sands National Park, should you be looking for something to do later this summer, I encourage you to go check that out. All right, from Las Cruces to Ruston, and it feels like we are fully traversing the entire continental U.S. In our Conference USA preview with Louisiana Tech Bulldogs led by head coach Sonny Cumbie. Their win total 5.5, shaded to the over at minus $1.20. And when we look at La Tech, it hasn't exactly been a rosy outlook over the past couple of seasons, going just 11-23, mainly because their defense can't get a single solitary stop, and it feels like a far cry from the teams that Skip Holtz was putting on the field at the beginning of his tenure, what we saw from Sonny Dykes as well, and a program that you could typically lean on to be competitive when they stepped up in class. But as far as the spring is concerned, a lot of reason for optimism, and a lot of that is because Louisiana Tech has gone out and addressed the biggest position of concern, that, of course, being starting quarterback.
Yeah, so Hank Bachmeier, and put aside your thoughts on Hank Bachmeier. Obviously, the best performance for him was arguably his first one as a true freshman on the road in Tallahassee. Killed me, and I'm sure Payne as well, beating the Knowles. It was kind of downhill from there, but we're talking about a very experienced quarterback, a talented quarterback coming out of high school, was a 4-star recruit, and everything's relative as far as expectations. We're talking, this is Louisiana Tech, so a step down for him, and it's also more of a quarterback-friendly offense for him. So I like the move on Hank Bachmeier. That wasn't the only move. We're talking about a Louisiana Tech program that did a really good job in the recruiting class, number 78 in the country. That's as good for them in more than a decade, almost 15 years. And then also the transfer class, led by Bachmeier, 17 transfers. I like the Baylor transfer at running back, Squirrel Williams. He really flashed to me in the Oklahoma game. DeColdis Crawford, a Nebraska wide receiver. If there's one team in the league that really went out and upgraded the talent level, it was Louisiana Tech.
When you look at Sonny Cumbie, do you buy into him as a program builder and a CEO leading the program, or do you think he's still better suited more so as a coordinator? Granted, he's upgraded the talent level that you mentioned, but do you think he can take this team and allow them, despite a win total at 5.5, to maybe compete for a conference championship if they're able to recruit at this high level, not just one season, but make this the norm down there in Techville?
Good question. It's okay to say I don't know. I don't know yet.
Yeah.
I will know probably by the end of this year because I have some high expectations. Hint, hint. We'll talk about that more later at the end of this podcast. I thought they were, 3-9 looks bad. Defense was horrific. They were a little bit better than their record indicated a year ago. I mean, they did lose a couple of overtime games, heartbreaking losses. They were 0-3 in one possession games. You turn a couple of them around, they're 5-7. Maybe you don't have as much negativity. I do like, what did he do to rectify the situation? He went out and improved his team across the board. And he still got some guys to work with that were playing with him last year, particularly on offense. Trey Harris did go to Ole Miss, but Crosby at running back was really solid. He stood out to me on tape. Smoke Harris feels like he's been there for a decade. So a lot to work with there. There won't be any excuses, at least on being much more competitive this year.
Defensively, do you buy into some of the things that they were able to accomplish on that side of the ball in terms of bringing in an influx of talent as well?
Well, it can't be any worse than last year because I got to tell you, I watched
that is a very good point. That is a very low baseline that they have to try and exceed.
Even if half of their transfers are total misses, I still think it could be better than a year ago. I watched the UAB game, and it was one of the worst defensive performances as far as defending the run that I saw all last season. I mean, it was just McBride, the running back for UAB, total men against boys. Didn't even look like they wanted to even tackle him. I mean, and then that wasn't just that game. I mean, we're talking about one of the worst rush defenses in the country. They allowed 243 rushing yards per game, 6 6.1 yards per carry. Every time an opponent ran the football, 6 yards. That's pathetic. So yeah, I expect them to be a little bit better. I still think it's going to be a very offensive-driven program, and not only because of the head coach, but even personnel-wise this year.
Well, if Louisiana Tech wanted to send a thank you card, they might be able to do so to the schedule makers, because their Week 0 matchup comes against arguably the worst team in the entire league in FIU before they'll go on the road to take on SMU in a non-conference game. So we'll see exactly what that new-look offense is capable of doing against Coach McIntyre's Panthers defense right out of the gates. From Ruston to a lovely Texas El Paso, we head for Dana Dimel's UTEP Miners, who see their win total at 5.5. This number has been on the move a little bit, shaded to the under on the open, has ticked to the over. Modest movement there, nothing in terms of actual half games. Arguably one of the toughest coaching jobs in Texas college football. I mean, you mentioned maybe in the entire country. The Miners have bowled just 7 times in 55 years and have won more than 8 games just twice ever in their program's history. Biggest coaching point from Dana Dimel during spring was being assignment sound with so many new players coming in to help the program. So much so that the Miners did not actually have their own spring game, just took advantage of that additional practice. There does appear to be talent returning on the offensive and defensive side. But again, reason for optimism about the recruiting class that UTEP was able to bring in to help get them back to the postseason, something that they missed out on last year by the slimmest of margins.
Yeah, so, he went out and got a bunch of JUCOs. Something you don't hear about too often. Because everyone's so focused on the transfer portal and then obviously the recruiting ranks. So, probably an opportunity to really scout over the JUCO ranks. Almost 25 of them, last I counted, as far as incoming JUCO guys. It shows you that they want to win now. I don't think Dimel should be feeling pressure. I think he's done a wonderful job the last couple of years, considering they went to a bowl game 2 years ago, came down to basically one possession against UTSA, a game they should have won. They blew a big lead, pick 6 before halftime, totally changed the momentum of that game. I watched the Boise State game during the season. It was a Friday night game, and I thought it was one of the best performances I've seen from UTEP in my 30 years of watching college football. They just dominated physically, Boise State. And speaking of physicality, I think they can lean on it again this year. They got 4 starters back on the offensive line. They lost a key guy, the right tackle, to Florida State. I couldn't get Payne to shut up about him at dinner a couple weeks ago, how good this Byers kid's going to be. But Hardison's back at quarterback. They got a solid running back. The question I have is, believe it or not, UTEP's had a couple of dynamic wide receivers the last couple of years. And we're going to mention this almost ad nauseum. Those guys get picked up now. And, Jacob Cowan went to Arizona and had a 1,000-yard season at Arizona. And this year, the guy that I thought offensively really flashed to me was Tyron Smith. Had 1,000 yards receiving. Where's he at now? He's at Texas A&M. So, unfortunately for programs like this, anybody that really stands out is going to get picked up and probably end up at a Power 5 spot.
Yeah, it's definitely the big challenge. Almost every week, these Group of 5 programs that have difference makers, whether they be in the trenches or on the outside, are going to catch the eyes of some of those power programs that are looking to add to their coffers and try and acquire talent there. So UTEP will be very interesting. They start this season against the next team on our preview list, that, of course, being Jacksonville State, led by a familiar name for those folks not familiar with the program, one being Rich Rodriguez. Best part of his first season at Jacksonville State, you ask? He accused his season-opening opponent last year of spying on the spring game. But to Rich Rod's credit, did lead the Gamecocks to a 9-2 record. They won the ASUN Conference Championship. Staff returns all but one full-time coach, obviously helped with preparations for the spring game. When you look at Rodriguez, since leaving West Virginia in 2007, hasn't had a ton of success. Fired after just 3 years on the job at Michigan with a 15-22 record. Was let go after 6 seasons in Tucson at Arizona, 8 games above 500. And it also came with a sexual harassment claim against him to boot as well. Spent a year at Ole Miss, a year at ULM, both as an offensive coordinator. When we look at Jacksonville State, we talk about Rich Rod. Brad, it's always going to be about the quarterback position. And there were 6 quarterbacks that took reps in Jacksonville State's spring game on a Thursday night. The biggest question mark for this program is waiting to figure out if Zion Webb can get his 7th year of eligibility granted to lead this team in their Week 1 opener against UTEP.
Yeah, that's significant. I would say Webb's probably worth about 2.5, 3 points to the overall team power rating. Not that he's a great passer. He's not, but very inconsistent. But he's a really good runner and a guy that, was originally at a Power 5 school that can really run the offense. I mean, he's dynamic in the run game, 13 rushing touchdowns a year ago. So that is something to keep an eye on that the market's not going to necessarily have appropriately priced in my opinion, whether or not he plays. The good news is they got a really stable running back core, in my opinion. Lewis, their leading rusher a year ago, was good. The guy I really liked was Wiggins as far as explosiveness, 7.7 yards per carry. He really flashed down the stretch. I think they got a decent wide receiver. I was also watching a little bit of those spring game highlights. Galvin at wide receiver is really good, in my opinion. He was last year's leader. So there's some weapons there on offense, no matter who starts, that they got a clue. And look, Rodriguez, would I trust him at a Power 5 school? No. But at this level, absolutely. I mean, he hasn't forgotten offense. They're still running wide splits, zone reads. They're running the football considerably. 69% of the time they ran last year. So the quarterbacks doesn't mean as much as what it could be, at least in the balance here after spring, whether or not you're going to return your multiple-year starting quarterback or not.
Do we feel some of college football has caught up to the principles that made Rich Rod so successful in Morgantown well over a decade ago? Or what do you feel has kind of slowed down his ability to win at other programs, knowing how talented he is as an offensive mind?
It's a good question. I mean, I thought he did a decent job at UL Monroe as the OC, enough to get this job. Arizona was a mixed bag, obviously down the stretch off the field. But I thought, he did take Arizona to a Fiesta Bowl. So
true.
And then
no easy feat down there.
Yeah, and then saw what Sumlin did with that program right after him. So I don't know. I mean, certainly, it's caught up to him a little bit compared to what he was at West Virginia. It also helps. I mean, it hurts him. He doesn't have Pat White and Slayton and everybody that he had at West Virginia. So, yeah, he doesn't have the edge that he did 15, 20 years ago, but I'd still take him. I'm not talking him as a quality human being or whatnot. I don't know him personally, but I'd still take him over most of the coaches that he's going to be coaching against in this league.
That's always the big question. When you look at the competitive subset there, look, we're not comparing Rich Rod to Nick Saban. That's not his competition on a week-in, week-out basis. It's some of the other up-and-coming compatriots that I'll have to deal with in Conference USA, a lot of unfamiliar and oftentimes untested names in terms of winning at the highest level. A coach, though, that does have a national championship to his credit, or at least 2 of them, I should say, will be the man leading Sam Houston State from the FCS into the FBS ranks, that being Casey Keeler, who entered his 9th season down there. Their win total sits at 4, slightly shaded to the over. A brutal 3-game opening stretch for the Bearcats. That's Bearcats with a K. At BYU, Air Force on a neutral, a bye week, and then at Houston. They do have a unique distinction as a program to basically win 3 different conferences in a little over a year. Won the FCS spring season title post-COVID. He won a national championship at Delaware with a very familiar name to NFL fans out there, Joe Flacco leading the charge. And when you look at what Casey Keeler did, I found this unique, Brad, an interview I listened to, decided to redshirt 15 players in their final FCS season so they could help bridge the gap, knowing that Sam Houston State was going to step up in class, and sold them on the idea of getting 1 or maybe even 2 years of FBS football under their belt.
Yeah, I thought it was smart. I wish I took advantage of it more last year, that it was kind of a throwaway year for them. It makes sense on a variety of fronts. Number one, let's talk about the program. You talked about that spring national title. Keep in mind, that was the 2020 quote-unquote season that was played in spring of 2021. They go 10-0 in that season. And they beat a who's who at the top of the FCS, at least in the playoffs. We're talking North Dakota State, James Madison, South Dakota State. So regardless of what people think is a fluke or not, as far as that title, they beat the best that FCS had to offer. Then what they do, they play 12 games in the fall of 2021. They start 11-0 and end up losing the playoffs. So they play 22 games in 9.5 months. So I got to think from a physical aspect that, probably some of the players are feeling it a little bit. So last year they only played scheduled 9 games. They're in between. They're tweener conferences, so to speak. They're not eligible to win the conference or go to the playoffs. So I liked what he did. I mean, last year didn't mean much. and it was kind of a throwaway season. So to redshirt a bunch of the guys made a lot of sense. I just wish I took advantage of it like I should have, because, knowing me, I watched their opener against A&M, and I thought, this team's going to be solid this year. They covered the spread against A&M. I liked some of the playmakers on defense for them. I thought, they'll be all right. And never bet really much Sam Houston State games the rest of the season.
Do you feel when you look at a program like this that they can become a sleeping giant in Conference USA, knowing where they are in terms of a geographic footprint? Keeler's been able to win at multiple programs. They have continuity. It's not like he took off or went anywhere else. I mean, and to their credit, they were able to land a relatively proven quarterback. I say that with the caveat of Grant Gunnell coming in to lead the charge. But it feels like if there's one program in Conference USA that I want to buy stock in now, it might be this Sam Houston State Bearcats team.
Yeah, I could see that. And look no further than, why do you follow recruiting rankings? Because they give you kind of a harbinger to the future a little bit of a crystal ball, so to speak, pun intended there. They signed a top 100 class this year, third best in Conference USA, right out of the gate. So you're right. I think that from a talent aspect, they can get in the mix. I don't think it's going to be this year, obviously. I think there's going to be an adjustment period. But and Casey Keeler's been around so long. I mean, this is a guy not only won 2 national championships at the FCS level, but he's played in a total of 9 national championships going back to his Division II days. So he wins everywhere he goes. So you ask me, a year or two from now, I'm gonna agree with you now if you want to buy low. I'm not saying buy their season win total, but it would not surprise me a couple years from now we're doing this podcast and Sam Houston State's win totals double what it is this year.
It's always about trajectory of a program, guys who are committed to trying to build it up, and obviously being located very close to a lot of the highest profile high school programs in the state of Texas can bode well if Keeler is able to pick off some of those second-tier recruits that aren't lining the rosters for Steve Sarkisian in Austin, Jimbo Fisher in College Station, and some of the other proud programs that are there. But Brad, no Conference USA preview would be complete if we didn't allocate proper time to the Florida International Golden Panthers, led by Mike McIntyre, who find their win total, or at least it was, 2.5 with heavy juice over. We have seen movement from 2.5 to 3. You do need to lay $1.35 now to go over. And I guess it's all about Mike McIntyre's ability to turn programs around. Can he perform the same miracles here that he's done at some of his other stops along the way?
I thought he performed a miracle last year, getting that team to 4 wins. Are you kidding me? When they were at their worst, they were by far the worst team in the country a year ago, despite winning 4 games. They lost by 73 to Western Kentucky. I get it. Western Kentucky's a good team. Well, they lost by 29 to Texas State, a bad FBS team. 34-point loss to UTEP. UTEP doesn't get margin on anybody. They lost by 45 to a 5-7 FAU team. So they were really bad when they were off their game. But they somehow, found a way to win 4 games. I do like McIntyre, not at Colorado, even though he had one good season there. But at this level, again, it's all relative. Yeah, I think he's better than a lot of coaches at this level. What I liked is you got a veteran staff, veteran coaches. You got this old school probably mentality. They kind of embraced analytics a little bit last year. They went for it, 34 different 4th downs. That was 12th in the country. They went for it 60% of the time in opponents' territory as far as 4th down, 3rd highest in the FBS. So they've embraced some analytics. So maybe not necessarily this year, but because I think there could be a better team and not necessarily have a better record. But in the future, certainly. It's another talent-rich area that he could recruit to.
Hey, that's the name of the game. Use some of the local resources that are right there at your disposal. And if you're able to get those tentacles into some of that South Florida high school football scene, maybe Mike McIntyre can get this team back to a bowl game. It's been a while since Florida International football was relevant, as suggested by their win total this year, a postseason berth. Probably a little bit of an uphill battle. I will say if FIU is able to accomplish that, they better get their 6 wins before their final 2 games of the season that see them going to Arkansas to take on the Razorbacks and hosting Western Kentucky in their season finale.
I don't think you're going to have to worry about that.
Yeah, well, hey, look, Brad, come on, we're optimists around these parts. We like to be glass half full guy for all the devout Florida International season ticket holders and football fans that are hanging on our every word, needing something to cling to hope that this fall will be different than what they've experienced in the past. You can follow Brad on Twitter at BradPower7. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there as well. Again, most importantly, for all things Bet the Board, follow the podcast feed at Bet the Board Pod. And if you haven't already done so, encourage you to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast and sign up for the Bet the Board newsletter that'll start to circulate as we inch closer to football season. But Brad, that's not the end of this fine program here, talking all things Conference USA. It's good old actionable elements here with the best bet. And where are you taking us, my friend? Although I think I have a pretty good indication as you've teased one program multiple times at the top and we broke them down individual, but I have to see if my intuition steers me in the right direction.
Yeah, so we're going to go to Louisiana Tech. And let me say that I have bet win totals on almost all these teams. I didn't mention it because, people don't want to hear on disparate numbers that I got that are like a win-off market as far as what the numbers are right now. But this one is available at FanDuel and DraftKings. There are some different numbers out there that I would not recommend taking, but we're going to go Louisiana Tech over 5.5 wins. Again, available at FanDuel and DraftKings for this one. I made it 6, so we got a half a win. What do I value a half win at? About 70 cents. So, just put it in baseball perspectives. You're taking, a dog that, at plus 170 when it should be even money. You figure it out for yourself. You're going to make some money in the long term. So, made it 6. We talked about this team maybe being, a little bit negative. Is the scheduling dynamics that they, one of those 3 teams that play a bunch of games early. Again, out of the 3 teams, I'm not as worried about this one because of all the influx of Power 5 transfers that they got. Schedule-wise, I got them more than a touchdown favorite in 4 games. So let's start there. They should win those 4. Slight favorites at Jacksonville State. They have 5 other games where I got them right now priced less than a touchdown underdog. So likely to win 1 or 2 of those games. Again, much improved through the portal, better than their record again last year. You look at that 3-9 record, 3 close losses could have easily been a 5-win team a year ago. So with the influx of talent, it being a second year of a head coach, I like Louisiana Tech over 5.5 wins.
One thing I will say for Louisiana Tech, as their athletic director and those folks that are responsible for trying to build out a schedule, I don't know who they pissed off within the conference because they're the only team that finishes a week early. We know it's an unbalanced schedule with 9 teams. So despite playing week 0, they get themselves just 1 bye out of the mix. But to your point, looking at the overall talent profile of this program, clearly significantly better than a lot of their conference compatriots. And you wonder when you look at weeks 3 through 5, games that'll see them at home against North Texas, taking on Nebraska, and then going to UTEP. Some of the philosophies in play there, if they decide to hold some players back and make sure they're locked and loaded for a conference schedule that maybe gives them an opportunity to surprise some of the big boys if everything falls the right way. You mentioned what a half win could be worth, and I wanted to pick your brain a little bit on that because I know there are questions that inevitably come up. They did after the best bet we gave out for the AAC as well. And a variety of these books will have different prices. One prominent shop when it pertains to Louisiana Tech, 6.5. I've seen under minus $1.30, minus $1.40. I know out there for whatever reason, when we talk about social media and some of the bad habits, the bad information that gets recirculated out there, win totals, do you feel comfortable laying prices to obviously give yourself that edge when it comes to going over a win total that's a half game or in this case a full game different than the market? Or is it all a sliding scale that, hey, look, if I think a 6.5 is priced incorrectly, look, I may be willing to go over that number the same way I would be over 5.5 minus $1.20. Again, talking in generalities and a hypothetical more so than how it pertains to Louisiana Tech here, knowing that 5.5 is available at some of the more prominent shops.
First and foremost, I like getting that best number, even if I got to pay some significant juice, just because, it tends to add up over the long run, those half wins, even if you think it might be off a full win. I still am not afraid, at least me, this is personally, I'm not afraid to lay a little bit extra juice. But look, I would say that looking at what this win total market's been just the last couple of years, you can pretty much, if you just have a few more outs and really look at it, and what do I mean by a few outs? I'm not talking 2 or 3. I'm talking, really look at the board, 6, 7 different outs. You can almost on every single team at minimum find that half win just by shopping around. In many cases, finding a full win difference just by looking at six or seven different books. So no matter where my price is, if I think it's off a win or so, I like getting that absolute best of the number, even if it means I got to lay, minus 150. Or I'll give an example. Kansas State and Oklahoma this year, their win total at FanDuel was off a win. Every market had them priced at a certain win total. Oklahoma 9.5, Kansas State at 8.5, and FanDuel had them both a full win lower. I was not afraid to lay heavy juice, meaning minus 170 plus to get that full win, because I price a full win. We're talking nearly 140 cents, 150 cents. So, me personally, I've taken 88 different win total positions.
Brad, there are only 133 teams in the FBS. Where are the rest of them? You still have time to get down for the other 40 plus,
yeah.
Right?
And it's not that, oh, wow, you think you have that big of an edge? Now the sports books have created an edge for me just because there's so much disparity in the win total market right now.
It's crazy. And we tell people all the time that, look, we know a lot of our listeners are in states that they don't have access to some of the regulated books that are out there. But for those of our listeners that do, whether they've been with Bet the Board since we started this podcast nearly a decade ago, or you're just stumbling on us for the first time now listening to some of these college football previews, the single best thing you can do as a sports bettor, rather than improving your models or trying to tighten up your power numbers or anything else, is giving yourself an additional out. There's no reason, whether you're a $10 bettor or a $5,000 bettor, to try and take a bad number. Shop around a little bit the same way that you don't like to pay an extra dime for a gallon of gas or to try and overpay for a piece of clothing that you're buying in online shopping. Sports betting should be no different. And if that's one lesson that we can leave all of our listeners with as the regular season inches ever so close, take advantage of the numbers that are out there. Let the sports books do the heavy lifting for you. Just be smart enough to give yourself the best opportunity to find the single greatest number for whatever side of the equation you happen to fall on.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
On that note,
go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. I didn't want to cut you off.
No, I couldn't have said it better myself.
And on that note, look, we've done some damage. We have, by my quick monkey math here, that's 23 teams down, a bevy of teams to go, 100 plus, a busy week for us next weekend. Hopefully all of our listeners enjoy the long weekend for Memorial Day. It'll give them plenty of opportunity to listen to all the teams that we've previewed. I think we have the Sun Belt, the MAC, some of the other group of 5 leagues that are on the horizon. But again, if you sign up to and subscribe to the Bet the Board podcast feed, you'll know right when these numbers drop. And most importantly, these win totals will be on the move. The market respects Brad's intel, so you're going to want to make sure that you get down on those as soon as possible to lock up some of those prices. So, Brad, any final nuggets, words of wisdom, life advice you'd like to share with our listeners before we reconvene next week and try and drop a few more college football nuggets in everybody's head?
No. And kudos to Payne, who'll be listening to this on a flight. We could do a whole show without getting our digs at you, buddy.
Look at us exercising self-control here, talking about Conference USA college football on a Wednesday morning here in late May. So for Brad Powers, follow him on Twitter at BradPowers7. I'm Todd Furman. Follow me there. Follow Payne at Payne Insider. And again, most importantly, Bet the Board Pod at Bet the Board Pod, with a Louisiana Tech win total 5.5 over minus $1.20 ticket in hand. Hopefully we'll see you at the window.
Thanks for listening to Bet the Board. You can catch Todd and Payne every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday during football season, breaking down the biggest NFL and college football games. And to make sure you don't miss any free best bets, subscribe to Bet the Board on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.